Welcome to our Lutyens Trust America webinar on Munstead Wood. My name is Robin Prater. I'm the Executive Director of the Lutyens Trust America. Munstead Wood is one of the most iconic of Lutyens' early houses. It was commissioned by gardener Gertrude Jekyll. The two would go on to work together on many projects over the years, but none so personal as the home that Miss Jekyll had envisioned for many years before meeting the young Edwin Lutyens. The gardens at Munstead were begun before the house was ever started. Lutyens and Jekyll spent many hours planning the house and integrating it into the garden. I imagine Lutyens learned many lessons in designing Munstead, not the least of which was the importance of designing for particular needs of his client. It is my honor today to introduce two other extraordinarily gifted people, Clive Aslet and Annabel Watts. Clive Aslet is the new chairman of the Lutyens Trust in the UK. He is also a writer, commentator, historian, editor, and academic. Having joined Country Life in 1955, Clive was editor from 1993 to 2006 and still contributes to the magazine. Clive has published well over 30 books on architecture and history, not to mention his novel, The Birdcage, and his extensive writings for newspapers such as The Times, and his broadcasting on radio and television. His latest book, The Story of the Country House, was published in 2021 by Yale University Press. Clive currently combines being a visiting professor at the University of Cambridge with his work as publisher of Triglyph Books, a venture started with photographer Dylan Thomas. Veteran broadcaster David Dimbley described Clive's writing as charming, erudite, amusing. His energy, enthusiasm, and learning always lightly worn. I would add to that this describes not only Clive's writing, but Clive himself. Those of you that have been fortunate enough to visit Munstead Wood in recent years will be familiar with Annabel Watts. She's been in charge of the gardens there for many years and has made a point to study not only the plants, but also the people and architecture of Munstead Wood. I love Annabel's story because it illustrates how an early interest in life can later bloom into something really special. The area of Southwest Surrey, so beloved by Gertrude Jekyll, has been an area Annabel has known for most of her life. Many years before her time at Munstead Wood, Annabel became, in her words, as she says, obsessed with the Victorian artist Helen Allingham, known for painting Surrey cottages and gardens. Many of those cottages were photographed by her friend Gertrude Jekyll, and Allingham was an early influence on Lutyens architecture. Meanwhile, Annabel was continuing her professional life as a PA in London, where she worked for 23 years before deciding it was time for a change. An advert in the local paper changed the course of her life. Part-time gardener required, no experience necessary. She rang the number and was invited for an interview at Munstead Wood, the home of Sir Robert and Lady Clark, that afternoon, and 4 days later she reported to work. Annabel considers her first 11 years at Munstead as her apprenticeship. When the head gardener turned in his notice, the Clarks persuaded Annabel to take on the job. Her part-time job with little responsibility overnight became a full-time job with a great deal of responsibility. Suddenly, the organizational skills learned as a PA came into play. As Annabel says, instead of looking after a boss, I was looking after an internationally recognized grade 1 listed garden. The garden at Munstead Wood today shows the rich results of Annabel's dedication. In addition to this webinar, we've been fortunate enough to be given access to video the house and garden at Munstead Wood. We will be making this video available for viewing for our member events for the Lutyens Trust America and the Lutyens Trust in the near future, and we're really excited about it. Today, I'd like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded. If you have questions, please add them via the Q&A button on your screen, and Marcos Lutyens will hold them until the end of the webinar, and then they'll be answered as time allows. Thank you again for watching. If you're not already a member, we invite you to join either the Lutyens Trust America or the Lutyens Trust in the UK. And now I will turn over to Annabel and Clive.
Well, hello. I'm Clive Aslet, as Robin was explaining. Robin, thank you very much for that introduction. Here is Annabel Watts.
Hello.
And we're very pleased indeed to be giving this webinar from Munstead Wood. We're enormously grateful to the Clark family who've made this possible. These are changing times here because Lady Clark, whom Robin mentioned, sadly died a few months ago, and the house is now for sale. So the future is a little bit unknown, but we're very pleased to be here. The Clarks are also enormously to be thanked because after the Second World War, Gertrude Jekyll's garden at Munstead Wood, which is one of the most important in England, was, like a lot of gardens which were difficult to maintain, largely grassed over, and it has been revived with terrific fidelity to Gertrude Jekyll's original ideas by gardeners, and particularly by Annabel, which we will be talking about a bit later. So here we are sitting in Munstead Wood, and I'm very pleased to be sitting in this glorious space. If you can see it, I don't know whether you can. I'm getting up, but perhaps it's moved on to the display already, which is the gallery of Munstead Wood, with this terrific expression of oak carpentry. Gertrude Jekyll had a great reverence for local style and local materials, and she knew the history of each of the trees that was cut down to go into her house. But the form of the webinar will be that we'll talk a bit about Lutyens, we'll talk a bit about Gertrude Jekyll, we'll look at the outside of the house, at the garden, at the inside of the house, and at the different buildings associated with it. So to say a word about Lutyens, since we're the Lutyens Trust, here he is in a painting by Meredith Frampton in 1933, painted 1933 to 1944. It's hanging in the Art Workers Guild. It shows Lutyens at the height of his career as a public man in this terrific, wonderfully stylized portrait, which I think must have been a very accurate impression of one aspect of the man. But Robin, if you could show us the next slide. This is perhaps how he was more likely to appear to his friends. William Nicholson, the painter, was a great friend of his, and this cartoon has a lot of the man about it, because he was immensely funny, witty. He was very shy, but he hid his shyness behind a barrage of jokes that he told with great fluency, and they were funny. Sometimes they were rude, but they made people laugh a great deal, and he was very widely adored. But he had grown up in Surrey, not far from Munstead Wood. He had grown up in a village called Thursley. He went on to become a great architect, and this slide, which is a capriccio by Carl Laubin of all Lutyens's work, with his great, actually never built beyond the crypt, Liverpool Cathedral in the centre, but Viceroy's House at the top left, which is a building in New Delhi which is bigger than the Palace of Versailles. So he built an enormous amount, and one of the reasons that he built such a lot was that he began his career very, very early. But one of the things that set him off, really formed his early style, was his connection with Gertrude Jekyll, who really, I think it could really be said, made him. He was advising on buildings for important people, extraordinarily enough, from the age of 17. He was really the architectural equivalent of a child prodigy. He had little formal education in architecture, but his very first buildings, he opened an office at the age of 19, but his first buildings don't really give an indication of the promise that was to come. And it was really this combination of Lutyens and Gertrude Jekyll which formed him. He was obviously very quick at taking on board ideas and learning from her, but it was, I think, this combination of Jekyll who spotted this very young man, this shy but talented young man. Somehow she perceived the genius that she could bring out. And this really happened in the creation of Munstead Wood, which is why it's so important. He was a romantic, but intensely romantic man. And the next slide shows, I think, his a letter to the woman who became his wife, Lady Emily, and he's kneeling before her like a knight errant in front of this adored object, his future wife. He had a different way of caricaturing Gertrude Jekyll. If I could have the next slide, please, Robin. But there she was tending her flowers on the left, and on the right, she's shown as his guardian angel. And it's a bit cheeky, but actually he did see her and recognize her as guardian angel. And he did another drawing, which is in Christopher Hussey's biography, of himself kneeling before Gertrude Jekyll in very much the same pose as he was kneeling before Lady Emily. And she is telling him, go forth and, and probably do as I say. There was a difference, I should say there was a difference in age. Lutyens was born in 1869 and Gertrude Jekyll was born in 1843. So he was, I think he met her when he was about 20 and she was already in her 40s. So it was a kind of interesting partnership. And of course, they did become great partners in Gertrude Jekyll's gardens, and Lutyens very often created the garden architecture, which she would then fill with planting. Next slide, please. So, Annabel, would you like to talk about this extraordinary woman?
Yes, I would. And looking at those pictures in front of us now, of course, we're more familiar with the painting that William Nicholson did of Jekyll in her old age. So it's quite a surprise to see her in her youth here on the left-hand side. And she was an intrepid traveller when she was in her early 20s. And she went to places like Turkey, Italy, Greece, and Algeria. And to see her on horseback, which of course would have been the most usual form of travel, is again perhaps a bit of a surprise. But she was a very competent horsewoman. And so I think these two images of her as a younger woman really are sort of just add a bit of life to that portrait that we're so used to seeing.
She came from a very intellectual background.
Yes, she was very well connected. Her family were very well connected. Her father was a military man, and she was one of 5. She had 3 brothers and a much older sister. And being the youngest, I think she was not only used to her own company, but she was also used to being in boys' company as well.
I think that she knew Ruskin. Did she know William Morris? She
attended lectures given by both when she was at the art school, at South Kensington schools, and she was heavily influenced by them and read up their books.
So she had sort of drunk at the fountainhead of the arts and crafts.
Absolutely, very much part and parcel of that later on.
And I believe Ruskin gave her advice on what her house should look like, that she then passed on to Lutyens.
She wrote to Lutyens, having had the idea of using marble, and he wrote back saying, no, whitewashed timber and tapestry is the appropriate way of kitting out an English house in a northern climate. And I think she took that to heart.
Very much so.
Along with other ideas of Ruskin, Ruskin was really the kind of intellectual engine behind the arts and crafts movement, along with William Morris. Could we have the next slide, please, Robin?
That's the one we're familiar with, isn't it? I was told a really rather nice story that although looking really rather matronly there was actually a string at the back of her chair with a cork on the end, and that's where her cats would play. So I always look at that now with a little smile to my face.
Yes, these are painted by William Nicholson, who did the cartoon of Lutyens earlier, and I think they were commissioned by Lutyens. They're now certainly the one on the left is now in the National Portrait Gallery.
Indeed, that's right.
And I think the story is that Nicholson painted the boots because he couldn't get Lutyens, Gertrude Jekyll to sit still long enough to do the portrait. So he painted the boots while he's waiting.
Well, the boots were there's a story behind the boots, isn't there? Weren't they a pair of boots that were the same as some that she had gone to pick up for the gardener, William Robinson?
Oh, that's true.
And they were man's
That's
boots.
right. Yeah.
But she didn't care about that. They were William Robinson was a great
Functional.
gardener, but they were highly functional. Yes, exactly. They were functional.
That's right.
They were the best boots for gardening in, so she had them. Well, there were some buildings which preceded the house that we're in now. Gertrude Jekyll had grown up in Munstead House, which was a big Victorian, I think, house, which is very near here. And as a girl, she wasn't going to inherit it. She wanted to go on living in the area. Had her mother died? Is that?
They originally lived in Wargrave over in Berkshire at an inherited house. And when her father died, I think it was Colonel Jekyll, the widowed mother moved to Munstead House. They had it built, and that's just across the road here. And that's where Jekyll was living when her mother acquired this 15 acres of heathland here opposite Munstead House, because there was a rumour that a girls' school was going to be built here.
Yes.
And the Jekylls didn't much like the prospect of living
noisy
opposite a girls' school. So this was the area of land here that Jekyll then began building, had the hut built.
And so she first of all built this this house, which was kind of jokingly called the hut, but really it is a sort of cottage in a very early Lutyens style. Lutyens had partly grown up at Thursley. His family had lived in Kensington, but spent the summers at a house in Thursley. And he didn't go to school because he was ill as a boy. And so instead, he spent a lot of time bicycling around the Surrey lanes at a time when they were being discovered by artists like Helen Allingham and Burkett Foster, who it was convenient for people to come and go by train. But he was cycling around looking at the old vernacular buildings like cottages and farmhouses. He was sketching them. There's a famous story that he sometimes, if he didn't have time to sketch something, he would use a piece of sharpened soap and he'd hold up a piece of glass and look through the glass and just make a few marks on the soap, wash them off later. But the act of doing that was enough to fix it in his mind, which was very retentive. And so he had a repertoire of details that he'd observed just through simply having been brought up in Thursley. And they came into play when Gertrude Jekyll asked him to build for her. But although he had some knowledge of how to build, obviously, he had spent some time looking at builders' yards and things in Surrey, as well as spending just, well, less than a year with Ernest George, the architect, before going to art school. So he had the knowledge of how to make architectural drawings and things like that. But she was really the one who had a very, very strong idea what sort of house she wanted. And she wrote about it in a book called House and Garden, didn't she?
She did indeed. After all, she was 53 when she moved into Munstead House when it was ready, so Munstead Wood. So she'd had a long time to think what she wanted her own home to consist of. Yes.
This is an interior of the hut, and it is very cottagey, isn't it? It's interesting that there's a fireplace there, a small one, right next to a passage, which is the same arrangement as we have here in Munstead Wood. Could we have the next one, please, Robin? Well, here are two plans. This is the Lawrence Weaver, isn't it?
That's correct, on the
left. And thank you to Judith Tankard, because I have taken the one on the right from her book about the garden at Munstead Wood. And would you like to talk us through the layout
yes.
here, Annabel?
On the right-hand side, this is how Munstead Wood was originally back in the 1880s, when Jekyll, let's say, converted that 15 acres of heathland at the age of 43, she got to work straight away. And she then had the gardens all laid out prior to the house being built. So from the early 1880s, she designed the layout of the gardens here. Then she had some work buildings erected, the gardener's cottage and the hut. She also, in 1891, had the loft built as well, which is now known as the quadrangle. And that's where the business of Munstead Wood was carried out. And she also started up a nursery and had a reserve garden. She also had a vegetable garden by the gardener's cottage and an orchard as well. And she also had reserve gardens and also trial gardens, as well as the formal gardens that were here around the house at Munstead Wood, with the woodland as well. So that 15 acres of heathland was transformed into this business, which is really quite extraordinary.
It's really extraordinary. She was very well connected. Her family were had a lot of social connections, both that both she and her brother could often use on Lutyens' behalf, but they weren't enormously rich. They were well off, but not enormously rich. And this enterprise at Munstead Wood would not have been possible if Gertrude Jekyll had not worked for it and founded a business. She was already in demand as a craftswoman. She had very high levels of craft skill, which she used for things like embroidery and inlay particularly.
That's right, and wood carving as
Yes.
well, and silver repousse work.
As well as gardening and all these things. She really turned to gardening, I think, because of her eyesight.
Correct, yes.
Which was beginning to fail. But actually, all these activities continued at Munstead Wood because they had to, in order to make it work.
Income.
Yes, and you could see on the the plan of the whole garden that actually half of it was woodland, and the woodland was very important. On the plan on the right shows that it's kind of intensively gardened bit was well, much less than half the entire site, because the upper 2/3 is woodland. And I also just ought just to point out, because we'll see it later, that right at the tip of this interesting site shaped a bit like a boomerang, right at the bottom is the Thunder House, where she went to watch the thunder rolling in over the downs and lightning, right down there at the tip. Curious activity, but
yes, not one for me, I can tell you.
Anyway, let's move on. Thank you. And this is a glimpse of Munstead Wood through the wood. The approach to Munstead Wood was originally very, very low key. She didn't want people to arrive even in ponies and traps. They didn't necessarily take this path, which I think would have led from Munstead House, wouldn't it?
That's right, through the decorative woodland, because there was no woodland as such when Jekyll acquired the land, when it was all heathland. So she created the woodland there at Munstead Wood with all the azaleas and rhododendrons and various
roses.
Yes, that's right. That was she was heavily influenced by William Robinson, who was promoting wild gardening at the time. So yes, she was using Clematis montana and white rambling roses to use amongst the hollies and Portugal laurel. So you had sort of flowers and decoration high up, as well as all the planting below as well. So yes, heavily influenced by the wild gardening movement.
But the approach to Munstead Wood was very low key, and visitors had to walk the last few yards. Right. Gertrude Jekyll was very, she'd been brought up in West Surrey. She wrote it, well, she hadn't, she'd been brought up in Berkshire, hadn't she?
West Surrey first, and then moved to Berkshire.
And then moved to Berkshire. But she was very deeply attached to where she lived and wrote a book called Old West Surrey. She collected the things that belonged to what she, what people of the time spoke about as the peasant culture of the English people whose living came from farming, really, and who did everything by hand and never moved very far from where they were born. That was a world that it was nostalgic. We in our age are nostalgic for a world before climate change, possibly. She in that generation were nostalgic for this world of craft, which was vanishing. And this is what she wanted Lutyens to understand and to bring into Munstead Wood. Next, please, Robin. And you can see we come up to this very iconic view with these triangular gables, many features derived from the local vernacular that Lutyens had seen. Possibly there was an influence of Philip Webb, who was one of William Morris's great friend in the arts and crafts movement, who also had houses with these deep gables, but built of the local Bargate stone, which each stone of which has to be shaped and dressed. It doesn't become very smooth. It's a rough and tawny looking stone. These oversailing chimneys, which are marvelous examples of brickwork, and windows that are framed in oak, which turns silvery with age. And in a local vernacular detail, they're set flush with the walls, so that it has a very architectural effect, because they are all in the same plane. But as we'll see, although all these details were derived from the local vernacular, Lutyens invented something new with them.
And also, just to point out that the window on the right-hand side in the previous photograph was Jekyll's bedroom that overlooked the woodland.
Oh, yes. On the right-hand side at the top, as Annabel was saying, that's overlooking not a flower border, but the woodland.
Yes.
And that's where
the silver birches are.
That's what Gertrude Jekyll wanted to see first thing in the morning. So the woodland was as important to her as the flower garden. Next, please. Well, we've gone around the corner here. And the thing about Munstead Wood is that it looks, in this slide and some of the others, it looks like quite a big house. And you think, well, Gertrude Jekyll never married. This is a big house for somebody who lived here by herself. But as Annabel was explaining, a lot of activities went on here. There was a long workroom. There was a shop where she sold flowers, and there was a darkroom, wasn't there?
That's right. Right down at the bottom on the right-hand side. That's it. Those two lower windows. And on the previous photograph, there was a book room there where she would sit at the window at her desk by the window. It's the little room on the left-hand side, just on the corner, right in the. That's it. That's where she would sit at her desk and write all her articles for Country Life and her various books as well. So she had these various books, various rooms in Munstead Wood devoted to various aspects of her work.
I should say, if I could correct something in the introduction, I didn't actually join Country Life in 1955. I was there for a very long time, but I was born in 1955.
I wondered about that when I got it, but as I said it, I worried about that.
But
a child prodigy.
Yes, it would have been good, but I was there for a long time. So here's a close-up of the stone, which is at the bottom. You can see that set into it. You know, he loves these contrasts of texture and material, a little like Roman walls, which have bonding courses of tile. He liked to introduce these strips of tile into the stone, partly as a decorative, a piece of decorative exuberance, really. It's a stone which you can't really get a very fine angle on it, so it always looks a bit rough. By the way, I must say thank you to Dylan Thomas, my business partner, who is a photographer and took all these photographs. Well, more of that tile forming an overhang above windows.
Would this be an early example of that work that one sees in his hard paving work around Pesticum, for instance?
Yes, I think it would be, and I think that he in many gardens, he used it in a kind of sunburst,
Exactly.
didn't he?
Yes.
And I should think this is probably the first example, I would guess.
I rather thought that.
Yeah.
And he went on to use it at Tigburn and Grey Walls
Yes.
and so many
Yes.
other.
Yes,
Work.
is very, very attractive, but kind of a signature. Not something he did it in different materials as well, but so it was always inventive, but it was a bit of a signature for him. Clay tiles are the typical Surrey roofing material. They're laid here ingeniously so that the joins are kind of very comfortable and not too acute. And here are just another couple of details, really showing the same thing. Mm-hmm. Next, please, Robin. Oh, now this tell us about this, Annabel.
Yes, this Jekyll asked Lutyens to incorporate this little narrow window that you can see in front of you, but it would have been unglazed in Jekyll's day because she insisted that Munstead Wood had an owl roost. So every house should have an owl roost. That's what it is.
I think it's lovely, that very simple building, which is appropriate to this different sort of activity. Next, please. Well, these chimneys, these tall chimneys, tall Elizabethan style chimneys, which are a feature really. I mean, brick is the material of the home counties. Really, Lutyens actually, with a client at a house called Danes Hill, set up brickworks, or rather, he encouraged his rich client to set up a brickworks so that he could have more molded and interesting types of brick that he'd previously been importing for Holland. This was a very important. This was a very important thing for Lutyens. The what you could do with brick, and the quality of the brickwork is exceptional. Well, this is a shot which shows the house at its full extent, but we better hurry on.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, this shows one of these windows, which, as I said, was set flush into the into the wall. I believe that's something you see in the Surrey vernacular, but Lutyens added a refinement, which we'll see a bit later on, which was that the catches which fastened the windows, and I bet this was an idea put to him by Gertrude Jekyll, actually hang down. You could just see, if you look very, very closely, hang down outside the window. Normally they'd be inside the window, but if they hang down outside, then it means that the windowsill is left clear, so you can put nice things like pots of plants on them. And
Jekyll writes in one of her books that she and her architect had quite an argument about which windows should open, and that she knew she was right, but in the end, her architect actually was right.
Yeah, I think there were many cases when actually she was right, or certainly there are many cases in which she got her own way, I suspect. Yeah. But of course, it was a creative partnership, and a slightly unequal partnership, because she was, of course, much older than Lutyens, and he had to, as I think you mentioned, Robin, he had to get used to the idea that he was working for a client. It wasn't something that he actually necessarily stuck to in his later career, because I think probably quite a lot of his clients ended up spending more than they expected. But still, this was a tremendous experience for a young guy who was still in his 20s. Here's a detail of some of the ironwork. I mean, a very typical thumb-operated latch on the left-hand side, and a slightly more elaborate latch on the right. And by putting the windows flush on the outside, he was able to have these wonderfully thick, deep windowsills that she could put her plants in, and it gave a nice light to the house. Yes, it is wonderful. Well, I like this very much because this shows a window and a door a door with big wrought iron hinges and the thumb-operated latch, and oak window surrounds and all the rest of it, and a relieving arch made out of, I think it's the Bargate stone. But these were vernacular details. But no vernacular house put them together like this. It was, this was invention by Lutyens, but using elements that he had drawn from the vernacular. Do you want to say about the box?
Not only that, I was going to also add that he also designed all the hard paving work around the house as well. So all these steps and the millstone that you can see there. And there is around the house in this paved area, there are geometric shapes like rectangle steps, a semicircle, a curve as well, and also the square of the tank that we'll see a little later, a sort of pool of water. But just below in the picture there, you can see half a millstone, and it's set in a square of stone there. But their little in-joke was that Lutyens insisted that Miss Jekyll planted a box, the shrub, in a box below in the container there, and that millstone with the square surround is reflecting the box in a box effect in front there. So it's rather nice that there is this sort of little story of the fun that they had when they were sort of making designs for the house. I think.
And Annabel, tell us about what this door leads to.
Oh, that's the flower shop there. And that's where Miss Jekyll would be selling bunches of lily of the valley and daffodils to florists in the high street. But if you were having perhaps a smart wedding or a dinner party and you wanted Miss Jekyll to make up flower arrangements, that's where she would make them up in there, in the flower shop there. So you're getting the idea of the place being run as a business, what with a dark room, a workshop, and a flower shop, as well as her book room as well. I should also mention that Jekyll didn't live there alone. She had a cook and a housekeeper as well.
I think that the millstones, they were used for grinding corn in windmills, which of course were no longer being used. And there must have been a tremendous supply of them because they crop up all the time in Lutyens's gardens, right down to Plumpton Place in the 1930s. And of course, he would have liked the geometry. They're a circular element. One of the things that Jekyll, in her love of traditional crafts and the traditional culture of the countryside, was that she greatly admired the craftsmen who were working on the house. And she talks in an amazing way in her book House and Garden about the bricklayers, and she describes how she would go from the hut, the little building, the little cottagey building that she had to begin with, and she loved to watch the progress of Munstead Wood being built. And she describes even the sound of the bricks being laid, which is a very funny thing, which I never would have thought of. And she described the water. Splop of it. It's just, it's a piece of poetry, really.
Indeed.
We need to move on and see the garden now, I think.
Right, let me move on. Let's go on.
This is the North Court here, and you can see the clematis that's draped or grown in a garland or swag fashion here. But when the clematis was in flower one May in 1890 or in the 1890s, Jekyll photographed it, and the photograph appeared in Country Life magazine, and readers were absolutely astounded because they hadn't thought before of growing clematis in any other way than straight up. But Jekyll's artistic eye just trained it in this swag or garland fashion here, and it just makes more of a feature of the North Court here. And being a North Court, this is where she had all her cool plants in pots and planted around the house as well.
And these windows are where you're are to the window, to the gallery you're sitting in right now, right?
That's it. That's where we are.
Country Life has some of her, I think they're called extra chromes or one of the autochromes. Anyway, she took photographs in color. It was very early, but she was experimental. But also, again, it was something that she sold. She sold these pictures for reproduction.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, these are more photographs of the North Court. And again, you've got the square of the tank there. There are now goldfish in there, and Jekyll didn't approve of having fish in ponds. So she wouldn't have had goldfish, but you get the idea of that little tank of water there. And yes, you can see all the box in a box. And you could just see right at the back there some canna lilies. And what Jekyll was doing was using that backdrop of dark green yew to enhance the planting in front. So a little later on, when those cannas produce a lovely scarlet flowers and the pelargoniums are already, you get that lovely sort of effect of the enhancement of that scarlet through the dark green of the yew hedge behind.
And Annabel, after the Second World War, this would have been grass, is that right?
Not this area,
Not this area.
but most of the garden
Most of
was,
it.
yes, it was. Where we are now, looking at the North Court in the garden, this was all grassed over during the after the Second World War. So in 1987 onwards, when we had the hurricane here in this country, it caused such devastation that over 200 trees came down around Munstead Wood. And it was the then head gardener, Stephen King, who then asked Sir Robert Clark if it might be a good opportunity to restore the garden, how Jekyll once had it. After all, she documented it so well in not only the written word, but photographic form as well. And it's thanks to Stephen, really, that the garden has 30 years on become mature and established and recognizable as it once was.
You've done quite a bit.
Well.
What about the paths?
So the paths here, these lead all the way around the garden, and all the paths are sandy soil, just left as they would naturally be, and they require hoeing when they get weedy, and I let the weeds just dry up in the sunshine and then just rake them over. So Jekyll wouldn't have had them gravelled or paved or whatever. We just keep them as she would have had them.
And didn't you tell me you occasionally find an old clay pipe?
Oh, when I'm digging in the garden, yes, bits of china, pottery, old clay pipes that the gardeners would have used to smoke, and also bits of garden label as well, and bits of shell, because Jekyll used pieces of shell for mother of pearl, and I come across quite a few of those sorts of items.
Wonderful.
This is just beyond the tank area, the paved area around the house. And this is just another view of it in flower in about sort of the mid part of June. And that's looking from under the gallery in the North Court out towards the garden. This is the only formal bit of garden with the cut or the shaped boxes. All the rest of the garden is really quite informal.
This is of interest because one day in, I suppose, the 1890s or 1900s, Lutyens was there with Miss Jekyll, and she had as her guest a curator from the British Museum. And she had at that point this great big elm bench. There's now a stone one, but a smaller stone one, but there's a heavy elm bench. And the man from the British Museum said, "This reminds me of the cenotaph of Sigismunda." And Lutyens said, "What's a cenotaph?" And this man explained that cenotaph was a monument built to somebody who was buried elsewhere. And when Lutyens was asked by the Prime Minister, Lloyd George, to build somewhere that the troops in the Great Peace Parade or Victory Parade could salute, Lloyd George suggested that it could be something like a catafalque, and Lutyens' mind went straight back to this moment at Munstead Wood, and he said, no, it should be a cenotaph. It was very, very appropriate because in the First World War, there were huge numbers of death, huge numbers of fallen, and the government insisted that no family was able to bring the dead bodies home to bury them at home, because everybody was equal in death, and whoever the person who had fallen was, be it a general or field marshal or a private soldier, they were all buried near where they fell, and they were all given exactly the same headstones that were set in these amazing cemeteries, of which Lutyens was one of the designers, amazing cemeteries, which they particularly wanted to be planted like a Surrey garden.
And here is a Surrey garden. Now, this is Miss Jekyll's 200-foot long summer border that's currently still in flower at the moment and is in flower from July till about October. Now, had you been a wealthy Edwardian and you just had a house designed by someone like Lutyens, this is what all the Edwardians wanted. They wanted a border designed by Miss Jekyll. And this just gives you an idea of the sort of complex planting of all the different plants like bedding plants, tender plants, herbaceous plants, bulbs, corms, gladioli corms. And that was a sort of, this is an example of the sort of border that the Edwardians wanted. And it made Jekyll a lot of money prior to the First World War. And obviously after the First World War, there were no commissions or anyone to maintain these borders. But this is the one we have at Munstead Wood to Jekyll's design. And there's the path that I have to hoe.
Robin, we'll have to hurry on or we won't get to the interior. And
there is another example, the view of the main border, 14 feet out and with a wall behind that's 11 foot high.
We had an incredibly hot summer this year.
We did indeed.
But it's standing up pretty well.
It absolutely is. Yes, that just gives you an idea of the full length of it once more. Jekyll had seasonal gardens here at Munstead Wood, and it's not a conventional garden. So the early part of the year, April till May time, this is when the primrose garden comes into bloom, and those are Miss Jekyll's Munstead bunch primroses there, the seeds of which she sold through Sutton's seed merchants, because she was always looking at Munstead Wood with a commercial eye. There is a nice feature in the doorway there that was painted by the likes of Helen Allingham.
And that's a very typical Lutyens feature, isn't it? Which recurs in many other Lutyens gardens.
There we are. And you walk through the door and that takes you into the three-corner garden, which will be the next slide. And that just gives you an idea of the early summer, May time planting, following on from the primrose garden. And in the distance there, you can see the roof of Miss Jekyll's work buildings over on the other side. On we go.
Well, here's the plan of the house itself. And one of the things that's interesting is that Lutyens was never obvious. You never went into a Lutyens house and saw the whole reveal at one go. It was always a journey, and this is true in Munstead Wood. In fact, it was true even in his classical houses. But you can see the journey in Munstead Wood. You start at the entrance, which is the bottom right-hand side. That's an entrance arch, which we'll see in a moment. You go. In fact, the entrance itself is set back a bit, so you go into a vestibule. And once you're inside this vestibule, you're facing a wall. So you then have to turn at a right angle and go down the corridor. I'm amused that nearly every Edwardian house had a gentleman's lavatory on the right-hand side of the front door, but there was no need for that in this house. And so Miss Jekyll had a lavatory which was accessible both from here, a little bit further on. Anyway, it's accessible both from the house and from the garden. But anyway, that's a detail. We move into the hall. Living halls were a new thing of the Edwardian period, really. We'll see a photograph in a minute. You then went up the stairs, and on half landing was the book room, which Annabel mentioned, this little room where Gertrude Jekyll was writing her articles and so on, which she was sending to magazines and being paid for. And then this long room is made up partly of a long workroom where all this craft activity took place, and then the shop is at the end. Next, please, Robin. You see, this is the entrance with, again, this is what became a characteristic Lutyens arch with a kind of sunburst. And these interesting kind of things which look like pigeonholes above that she might have seen on her travels in somewhere in North Africa, for example. But you go through that, you come into, this is the front door of the house with this very over-structured wooden arrangement above. We go through the door into the vestibule, this splendid fireplace, very, very plain, but very bold. And we go down the, this is actually looking back from the hall towards the vestibule. and we got a bit further into the hall here. Could you have the next one, please? And it's a slightly, to my eye, it's a slightly awkward room because I think that the ceiling is rather low for the width of the room. And it seems funny to have this this big fireplace right next to the staircase, although that's actually the arrangement that Gertrude Jekyll had in the hut. Next one, please. I think this is interesting because this is an early idea that Lutyens had, with an armorial J for Jekyll, obviously on the side of the fireplace. But it doesn't look Surrey vernacular at all, to my eye. It looks much more continental, with this hooded French-style fireplace projecting forward, although it's still right next to the passage, the open doorway to the passage. But I think this is before Gertrude Jekyll had got hold of him and had explained how he should be doing arts and crafts. Next, please. Next, I think. This is an interesting detail of the fireplace. And on the right, I've taken this page from Judith Tankard's book, which shows Gertrude Jekyll's drawing of the same profile. So I don't quite know what the relationship between those are, whether she drew it out herself.
I have no idea. It's interesting, isn't it?
And actually instructed Lutyens on how to do it as she wanted it. This is the workroom, isn't it?
That's the workshop there. That's right. There she had 2 carpenter's trestle tables in there, and that's where she did all her wood carving, inlay work, and silver repoussé work. And I was told by someone that Lutyens had his first architect's desk in there as well.
Oh,
well, that's true or not, I don't know.
No, fantastic. This marvelous staircase coming up to where we are now in the gallery, sort of open Elizabethan sort of staircase, and this fantastic gallery with the oak pegged with wooden pegs, as it would have been in the Middle Ages. Although actually the trees had been very well seasoned. Some of Lutyens' buildings, another technique was to build these timber frames out of green oak, so that when they shrank, they locked together. Actually, Gertrude Jekyll saw she knew the trees, but they had already been felled and quite well seasoned by the time Munstead Wood was built. Where is this?
That's in a dressing room to a guest room, and that little illustration or design there was one that Jekyll would use as a sort of to emboss her books with as well. So that's really rather nice, that little detail there. She was very fond of cats.
This
inlay work. That's
another piece of
her inlay work in Mother of Pearl. It's just beautiful.
Here is the Thunder House, from which she would, a triangular building. Lutyens loved geometry. He became rather fed up with the arts and crafts style in the end, which he felt he'd sort of got to the end of, and he turned to classicism, and which of course involves a lot of geometry. Even the arts and crafts buildings, so were arranged on geometrical principles. And here he's got a triangular building, very unusual. There was another one at Mells as a memorial to a young boy who died, but that was about 10 years later, and yet another on the top of a reservoir in the middle of Dartmoor, which goes by the delightful name of the Pimple. But here Gertrude Jekyll would look out and see the lightning flashing over the North Downs.
That's right.
What are we looking at here?
This is the loft. This is the first building that was put up on Munstead Wood at the time in 1891. And this is where the business of Munstead Wood was carried out. This is where the gardeners would sort all the seeds and prepare plants for clients, customers. And this is the back view of the loft. And in front is where Jekyll had a blue and grey garden. So these were her trial gardens. This was the working area here.
That's lovely. And of course, this weatherboarding, again, you see a lot of it in the home counties around London.
Yes, this is the courtyard behind the loft here. And you'll mention the stables there that were built in 1909 by Lutyens.
But in a more informal and picturesque style than the main house.
And the ponies had leaded light windows as well.
She drove a pony cart, didn't she?
She did.
Right? Yes. Well, we have a huge number of war memorials in the UK. none of the type that we have, or very few of the type that we have now, which record all the names of people who fell in a particular locality, had existed before the First World War. But there was a huge, Britain and other countries in Europe and Russia lost such a huge number of people that there was a need to express people's sense of remembrance and people's grief, and to form a focus of ceremonies. And all country house architects who had been country house architects before the First World War were engaged in building a lot of war memorials, and Lutyens was one of them. He had an official position on the Imperial War Graves Commission, but he was often called upon to design war memorials in villages adjacent to the places that he designed country houses. And this is at Busbridge, next to Munstead Wood.
I was told by someone that the raised area was to be used as a seat.
Oh,
So it had a sort of function.
oh,
as
could
well.
be. Yes,
Yeah.
actually at Mells, where that is also
Is
built
that? Oh, I
around
didn't know
built
that.
around a seat. But
Oh.
so yes, that's interesting.
Hmm.
And here are the graves.
Herbert, Agnes in the middle, and Gertrude on the left-hand side there. That yes was Lutyens' design to his final tribute, really, to the family.
Yes.
At Busbridge Church.
At Busbridge Church.
Mm.
And we finish here, and I think we have a few minutes for a few questions. So you guys did a lovely job. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an incredible talk. So here's some questions. Here's one from Jenny McGahey. Is Victorian Society or National Trust or Historic England interested in purchasing? I remember going there with Victorian Society. Is the Mushroom House building still privately owned? Who'd like to answer that?
The Mushroom House is privately owned next door, and that belongs to our next door neighbour who owns the loft. The first question that you ask, I believe that one or two trusts have been around, but as yet, I don't know what the situation is. To be honest, that's something for the family that they would know about. I can't answer that.
We have a question from Mary Nethery. What became of the previous head gardener, Andrew F.H. Robinson, who was there in the 90s to 2000s? I stayed in the gardener's cottage for 2 weeks and have hundreds of photos of the garden at the time.
I don't know what happened to Andrew. We haven't seen him for about 10 years, but I believed he moved down to Devon, and that's all we know. I don't think even Lady Clark knew what happened to him. But yes, I was with him for 11 years. So that's why I learnt my trade through Andrew.
And then there's another question from Mary as well. What are the tiny iron-coloured rectangular pavers by the seat at the big long wall along the rose garden?
Sorry?
What are the tiny iron-coloured rectangular pavers by the seat at the big long wall along the rose garden?
Does she mean ironstone cobbles?
Could be.
Yes, we find them in the ground anyway, so they've been used in a decorative form underneath barrels, and also in a floor to the summer house as well. So that's perhaps what she's talking about.
That was the very arts thing, to use material that actually came from the soil.
When they dug the foundations of the house, they would come across tons of them. So some of them have been used.
So just moving on, Beth, because we've only got a couple of minutes. Beth McNally, why did Jekyll disapprove of goldfish?
Oh, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that. But I think if she was had water lilies in pools, the fish would eat the lilies and the leaves. So I think she liked the decorative pool rather than filled with goldfish.
There are fish there now, aren't there?
There are now, yes.
Question from Anki Barnes. The main entry arch in the tall wall and hard right turn to the front door, etc., are very quirky. Is there any background precedent or history of this which helps explain this amusing and strange feature?
Well, I don't know. No, I don't know that there is. I mean, that was the original front door, wasn't it?
Yes.
Because that you got out of your. It's not like going to Goddard's with this, which has a very simple path up to the house. You got out at a little gate, I think, didn't you? Is that right? And then you went across the lawn towards that entrance.
Yes, that's possible. But were you asking about all those arched doors?
I think it was the well, yes, but also
right.
the turn.
Oh,
But
I
do
see.
you know what's the
Well, I know
precedent
that
of the
William
arch?
Robinson advised or suggested to Jekyll having arched doorways like in the wall, because the wall with the door came first, and also through all her yew hedges that led on to other parts of the garden, all have that arch.
Yes.
And
yes,
access.
Yes.
So it's very much a feature here, and even in the house to the book room there is the arch.
I think the idea of going through that arch in the wall and then turning immediately right, and that is quite quirky.
Yes, so you then see straight through to the garden in front of you, because you actually see.
We're actually over the hour.
You wouldn't have seen the pattern beneath it because it was covered in creeper, which has been taken off now, isn't it? So that's a new thing you can see.
We're going to have to finish up, but one last question from John Gunther. Did Miss Jekyll's failing eyesight contribute to her preference for broad brushstrokes of colour and planting arrangements?
Yes, definitely. Yes, it's the simple answer. Indeed.
Okay, well, since we're over the hour, we're going to finish up, and thanks to everybody for watching, and thanks to an amazing talk. And this is actually the 23rd webinar that we've done so far. You can find them on YouTube. If you'd like to support us, please consider joining or donating to the Lutyens Trust America or the Lutyens Trust. So thank you so much for joining us today. Bye.
Bye-bye.